Happy first day of Inktober, besties! It feels so good to be back, and we're starting this year's series off with the story of the Lady in Black. Lady in Black is a tale that originated in Boston, Massachusetts, specifically in Fort Warren, which was used as a training camp and a prison during the Civil War. The ghost is believed to be the spirit of Melanie Lanier, whose husband was a soldier imprisoned at Fort Warren, and Melanie came up with a plan to free him. Disguised as a man, she hoisted her body over the prison walls using a rope, reuniting with her husband. Using a pickaxe, she began tunneling out of the prison underneath the thick stone walls, followed by her husband and several other prisoners. Because the digging was so loud, the guards eventually heard them, and a fight broke out between the guards and the prisoners. During this, a guard tried grabbing a pistol Melanie was carrying on her, accidentally striking her husband during the scuffle. Melanie was arrested for trying to aid her husband in escaping and was sentenced to death by hanging. Still disguised as a man, she requested to change into women's clothing, and the guards found a simple black gown to clothe her in her last moments. Her restless spirit is said to roam Fort Warren, mourning the loss of her husband and holding the guilt and frustration of her failed attempt to free him. Screaming Jenny is an American urban legend that originated in West Virginia. Jenny lived in an old storage shed along the railroad tracks. She did not have much money to her name, but always kept her spirits alive and went out of her way to help others in need. On a cold autumn evening, she was huddled over a fire to keep warm. A single spark flew from the flames, lighting her skirt on fire. She did not notice at first until the flames burnt through her clothes and began scorching her skin. Immediately, Jenny ran out of her shed screaming for help as the flames grew larger. She knew the train station was not too far away and ran towards it in hope that someone would be able to help her. Overwhelmed with pain and her body engulfed in flames, Jenny ran onto the tracks and was struck by a passing train. It is said that on the anniversary of Jenny's death, she can be seen standing on the same tracks, covered in flames, and screaming for help. Many engineers claim they have come face to face with the burning ghost of Screaming Jenny, still pleading for someone to save her. Grace Sherwood, aka the Witch of Pungo, was the last woman in Virginia to be convicted of witchcraft. Grace was a healer and a midwife, often using natural remedies to heal people. Local women began accusing her of witchcraft, claiming she transformed herself into a cat, damaged their crops, and even caused miscarriages. After several charges, the court ordered that Grace's guilt or innocence should be determined by ducking her in water. Water was considered to be pure, so if Grace sunk to the bottom, the water was accepting her, but if she were to float, she would be considered a witch because the water is supposedly rejecting her body. On July 10, 1706, Grace was taken down to Witch Duck Bay in Virginia Beach. Her hands were tied to her feet, and the sheriff tied a 13-pound Bible to her neck. After being thrown into the water, Grace sunk a little bit but was able to untie herself, returning to the surface. She was put in jail for 8 years and lived to be 80 years old after her release. In 2006, 300 years after her trial by water, Grace was given an informal pardon. There is a statue in Virginia Beach dedicated to her today. Olive Thomas was an American silent film actress, art model, and photo model. She began her career as an illustrator's model in 1914 and eventually became a Ziegfeld Follies showgirl, which was a series of Broadway productions in New York City from 1907 to 1931. She was also considered to be the original flapper girl since she was in a 1920 film that coined the phrase. In September of 1920, while vacationing in Paris, Olive and her husband Jack Pickford returned to their hotel suite after a long night of partying and entertainment. Both intoxicated and tired, Olive Thomas ended up ingesting a mercury dichloride solution which had been prescribed to her husband to topically treat his syphilis. Whether this was accidental or intentional became a matter of debate. Unfortunately, Olive Thomas ended up passing away in the hospital 5 days later at the age of 25. Since then, Olive has been said to haunt the New Amsterdam Theater in New York City, where she performed often. People who have seen her ghost say she struts around in a green beaded costume that she previously wore on stage while clutching a blue bottle. Stagehands say if you do see her, it is best to say goodnight, Olive, as to not offend the theater's longtime resident. The spirit of Anna Sito is said to haunt the Spandau Citadel in Berlin, Germany. The story involves the Prince Elector Joachim II, who had a great love for hunting and was married to a woman named Hedwig from Poland. In 1549, Hedwig was involved in a tragic accident that severely injured her abdomen and made it extremely difficult for her to walk. Joachim took Anna Sito as his mistress, allowing her to live in a hunting lodge he had built west of Berlin. He eventually grew ill and passed away, and on his deathbed he asked his son, Johann, to look after the woman he loved the most, meaning Anna. Johann despised Anna and went against his father's wishes. He had Anna arrested and taken to the citadel, where she was imprisoned until her death in 1575. Days before Johann passed away in 1598, he claimed he saw Anna's spirit appear before him as a woman in white. In 1709, the palace was being reconstructed, and the skeleton assumed to be Anna Sito's was found and given a proper burial. Some stories claim, however, that Johann had Anna sealed within the walls of the hunting lodge while she was still alive. This means the skeleton that was found may not have been hers, and her restless spirit could still be haunting the fortress's halls. The spirit of the Green Lady is said to haunt the halls of Scotland's Fyvie Castle. Her name was Dame Lilias Drummond, and she was married to Alexander Seton. Alexander was having an affair with another woman, possibly due to the fact that Lilias could not bear him a son. One day, she suddenly disappeared and no one was sure of what happened to her. Many people speculated that her husband poisoned her or locked her up somewhere, but for whatever reason, she was never seen again. Lord Drummond eventually married his mistress and spent their wedding night in one of the highest towers of the castle. The wife said she could hear a mournful cry from outside her window, and she even heard scratching, but when Alexander looked, nothing was found. The next morning, Alexander opened the window and saw D. Lilias Drummond carved into the windowsill from the outside. Being that the window was so high and the words were etched in upside down, many believe that the spirit of Lilias Drummond was there that night. Since then, many people claim to see her ghost around Fyvie Castle, crying over the betrayal of her husband and leaving behind a scent of rose petals. The etching of her name can be seen on the windowsill to this day. In Slavic folklore, the liho is a creature that embodies evil and misfortune. Depictions of the liho vary, but no matter what, their most defining feature is that they only ever have one eye. They've been depicted as a thin, elderly woman dressed all in black, or they even appear as a male goblin-like creature that dwells in the forest. They are considered to be a servant of death, and it is best to not try and trick them, for they will always find a way to win. If you encounter the liho, you are almost always doomed to lose. In many tales, the liho will attach itself to a person's neck, making it impossible for the victim to break free. In desperation, the person will jump into a river in an attempt to drown the creature. Unfortunately, this usually results in the victim losing the battle and the liho swimming away to find its next victim. In Slavic mythology, Baba Smetana is an evil spirit that wanders the graveyards at night, bringing misfortune to those she meets. She digs up graves with her long, sharp claws, scattering the bones across the cemetery. She takes great pride in frightening the graveyard's nightly visitors, capturing them and pulling them down into their own grave and burying them alive. She particularly enjoys preying on widowed men, reveling in their grief and loneliness. When she sees them wandering the graveyard, she takes on the appearance of their loved one and follows them home. As Baba Smetana taunts them and warns them of the grim consequences to come if they replace her, the widowed man begins to question his own reality. Futakuchi Onna, aka the Two-Mouthed Woman, is a type of yokai in Japanese folklore that is cursed with having two mouths. She has a normal mouth at the front and another on the back of her head hidden behind her thick, lustrous hair. The woman's skull splits in two, revealing lips, teeth, and a tongue. In most stories, the woman appears to never eat, but the mouth in the back of her head is ravenous and consumes large amounts of food. There are a few different stories depicting how she got her second mouth. One story tells of a man who was out in the garden chopping wood for a fire when he accidentally swung his axe and embedded it into the back of his wife's head. Oopsies! The woman survived this, but the open wound never healed and instead formed into a grotesque mouth. The woman was in a lot of pain, and the only way to stop it was to feed her deformed mouth. It demanded more and more food and eventually even began to talk, mumbling spiteful and threatening things to the woman. A Sundel Bolong is a vengeful spirit in Indonesian mythology. They are often described as a woman with extremely long black hair wearing a long white dress. The legend tells of a beautiful woman who was forced into sex work and was later found dead with a large hole in her back. Stories vary on what her cause of death actually was, but one popular story claims that she was pregnant and died during childbirth due to a strange phenomenon that caused the baby to come out of her back. She was treated horribly by men during her life, so her victims consist mostly of men walking alone at night. She approaches them with ease with her exposed spine concealed by her long flowing hair. If the man rejects her advances, she mutilates them. Her other victims are children, especially newborns, which she takes in order to replace her lost child. The story of Mercy Brown takes place in Rhode Island during the late 1800s. Several members of the Brown family suffered from tuberculosis infections, causing the mother and sister to pass away in 1891 and Mercy Brown to pass in 1892. One of the younger sons, Edwin, was still alive, suffering with the disease. Friends and neighbors began to speculate that one of the dead family members was a vampire and was the reason behind young Edwin's condition. The father, George Brown, was persuaded to give permission to dig up the bodies of his family members in order to silence the rumors. The bodies of Mercy Brown's mother and sister had the expected level of decomposition, but Mercy's body had almost none at all, as if she was frozen in time. Reports even say that she still had blood in her heart. Because of this, local villagers suspected that Mercy Brown was undead and was the reason Edwin was ill. Mercy's heart and liver were burned, and the ashes were mixed with water to create a tonic to give to Edwin in an effort to heal him. He died 2 months later, and what remained of Mercy's body was buried again in the cemetery. In Celtic and Norse mythology, the Selkie is a marine creature that is half seal and half human. Unlike the typical mermaid, they are seals in the water, but on land, they take on a human form. They are said to be irresistible to ordinary humans who quickly fall in love with the Selkies. Legend says that in order to come ashore, Selkies must shed their skin or tail. If a human happened to find a Selkie's skin, they would hide it away, preventing the Selkie from returning to the sea. The stories often end in the Selkie being coerced into a relationship with a human who found her seal skin and hid it away. In Celtic folklore, Nycnefin is known as the Queen of Fairies. Her name is derived from a Scottish Gaelic surname meaning daughter of the little saint. She is the crone goddess of Samhain, representing the onset of winter, and she governs the realms of magic and witchcraft. Samhain marks the end of the harvest season and is celebrated on October 31st. It is said that on this day, the veil between worlds grows thin, and the living can communicate with those who have passed. Nycnefin is depicted as the mother witch of sorcery. Themes of protection, ghosts, divination, peace, and winter are often associated with her. Because of her association with Samhain, she is often seen with pumpkins and gourds, which are traditionally carved for protection and to illuminate the path for a spirit's transition from one world to the next. She is a goddess that can move easily between worlds and is said to fly through the air accompanied by flocks of honking geese. The Nukken is a humanoid shape-shifting water spirit popular in Scandinavian and German folklore. The tale changes from country to country, but the story is always born of the hostility and danger dwelling beneath the surface of the darkest depths of the water. The Nukken are said to be masters of the violin, playing enchanting songs in order to lure their victims to their deaths by drowning. They are considered to be a bad omen for drowning accidents, as they can be found screaming at certain parts of a lake or river to warn a person of their fate. Carrying a piece of steel or throwing it into the water is said to provide protection from the Nukken. In other stories, this spirit appears as a beautiful white horse. Should anyone be able to mount this horse, they will be unable to get off. The horse will dive deep into the water, thus drowning their victim. In Japanese folklore, Nukakubi is a type of yokai whose head can completely detach from her body. She appears as a beautiful woman during the day, but at night, while her body is asleep, her head comes off and floats about. During this state, she has a strong thirst for blood and relentlessly attacks her victims, sucking their blood like a vampire. When she returns to consciousness, she has no memory of what she did, as if her head became a separate entity. Being a Nukakubi was considered a curse for committing a great sin. One story tells of a woman afflicted with the curse, whose head flew about the city at night, chasing young men through the streets all the way to their houses. Locked out, her head would scratch and bite their doors and gates, leaving gashes in the wood. When the girl discovered she had the curse, she was so ashamed, driven mad with the fact that she would live forever as a monster. There is a similar creature known as the Rokurokubi. Instead of her head separating from her body, the Rokurokubi has the ability to stretch out her neck. In Mexican folklore, the legend of La Lechuza tells of a shape-shifting witch who transforms herself into a monstrous owl. She sold her soul to the devil in exchange for magical powers. Often she is described to be 7 feet tall with a 15-foot wingspan, with the body of an owl and the face of a woman. She stays perched on trees or flies through the sky after nightfall, swooping down and carrying away whoever crosses her path. If you hear a bird screech at night, it is considered an omen that La Lechuza is searching for her next meal. Some stories claim that she will even disguise her voice as a baby's cry. She waits outside your door, ready to attack. In Filipino folklore, the story of the Tiqui tells of a shape-shifting evil creature often represented as a terrifying woman. Two large bat wings sprout from her back, which she uses to fly. As she searches for prey, she is able to remove her upper torso from the bottom half of her body. Using their long tongue, they feed on human organs and blood as sources of food, preying primarily on pregnant women and their unborn children. Stories say the Tiqui are able to manipulate sound to lure in their prey, making them sound closer to you when they are further away and further from you as they come closer. If you think you are a safe distance from a Tiqui during an attack, you likely are not. It is said that one way to survive a Tiqui attack is to destroy its bottom half using garlic or salt, leaving its top half to burn in the sunlight. Popular in Scandinavian folklore, the Huldra is a seductive forest spirit, often depicted with a hollowed back exposing old, damaged tree bark, and has the tail of either a fox or a cow. Some stories state that the Huldra would seduce young men into having affairs, luring them into the mountains or forests with her singing and harp playing. Once in the deep forests or mountains, the men were seduced and the Huldra would ask the man to marry her until he agreed. Once the men agreed to marry her, the Huldra's appearance would drastically change as she loses her tail and gains the strength of 10 men. If betrayed, the Huldra are known to punish their victims severely. In other stories, rather than asking the man to marry her, the Huldra would dance with her prey in the forest until they died. All in all, the Huldra respond to the treatment they receive. If treated with kindness, it is said they will grant those they interact with much luck in their endeavors. Treat her cruelly, and you will receive the same. A Kelpie is a shape-shifting water spirit that inhabits the lakes in Celtic folklore. It can take on a human form, but it mostly appears as a strong and powerful horse. Many stories say that they can be identified by their mane, which seems to be constantly dripping wet. The Kelpie delightfully lures in its victims, specifically children, into the water to drown and consume them. Should you encounter a Kelpie, it is said you will get an overwhelming desire to climb onto its back. Once the Kelpie's victim falls into its trap, its skin becomes sticky, like adhesive. With their prey stuck on its back, they dive to the bottom of the water, devouring their victim, leaving only the heart and liver as remains. May Na is a well-known female ghost in Thailand. The story tells of a beautiful young woman who lived with her husband, who she loved more than anything. He was sent away to war, leaving a pregnant May Na at home. Her husband returned to see his beautiful wife and their precious baby in her arms, although his neighbors tried to warn him that he was living with a ghost. One day, while May Na was preparing dinner, she dropped a lime off the porch and her husband saw her stretch out her arm to pick it up from the ground below. It was then that he realized that his wife and baby died during childbirth and that he was indeed living with a ghost. He ran from the house as fast as he could, with May Na pursuing him, terrorizing the town in her grief. Her spirit was captured by a powerful monk, confining her in a jar. Today, there is a shrine dedicated to May Na in Thailand that visitors go to offer gifts of fruit, lotuses, and incense sticks to please her spirit and ask for help. In Slavic folklore, Baba Grahova is a demon that lurks in the pea crops and terrorizes farmers. She camouflages herself by wearing a dress of woven pea plants and has vines running through her unkempt hair. She waits until the tired farmers fall asleep in the shade of the crops, from which she silently emerges. It is then that she wraps her bony fingers around the farmer's throat, choking and biting them to death. Stories claim that she also takes pleasure in chasing the farmer's children from the fields. If captured, she will suffocate and eat them. Definitely won't be having peas as a side dish anytime soon. The legend of the Darg Dua is an Irish tragedy telling of another vengeful spirit. In life, she was known for her exquisite beauty, and to her father's disapproval, she fell in love with a local peasant boy. Enraged, her father quickly arranged for her to be wed to a wealthy man. The man she married was extremely cruel to her, and she endured days upon days of mental and physical abuse, which included pressing a knife to her neck to draw blood. She waited in vain for the day the peasant boy would come and rescue her. As days passed and she realized there was no hope of rescue, she took her own life. On the night she was buried, her undead corpse rose from the earth, driven by her thirst for revenge and for blood. Her spirit seeks the blood from children, the innocent, and especially young men, luring them in with a haunting song. In Slavic folklore, the rusalki or rusalka are often malicious feminine entities frequently associated with the watery depths. Many stories state that the rusalki are the spirits of young women who either took their life due to an unhappy marriage or who were drowned against their will, cursed to live out their time on earth as a vengeful spirit. The rusalki are known to haunt the waterways that they died in, seducing young men with their looks or voice and luring them into the depths of the water. She would then entangle the feet of her victim with her long hair and submerge them. As the young men grasped at their skin, desperate to reach the surface, it would become slick, giving them nothing to cling onto as they drowned. Some stories even state that while waiting for her victim to drown, the rusalki would tickle them to death while laughing. Kitsune are intelligent shapeshifters that possess magical abilities which increase with their age and wisdom. According to Japanese folklore, all foxes have the ability to take on a human form once they reach 100 years of age. Depending on the story, the kitsune can be master tricksters, often transforming into beautiful women to trap powerful men. However, in other stories, they are portrayed as faithful guardians, friends, lovers, and wives. Kitsune can have as many as 9 tails, and the only way to defeat them is to cut off their tails. While many believed that the source of a kitsune's power was held in just one tail, all tails would need to be cut off to defeat the spirit, as the tail which grants its power is unknown. There are 13 kinds of kitsune, each with a corresponding element, but all of them possess superior intelligence, long life, and magical powers. Ursula Sontiel, more commonly known as Mother Shipton, was an English prophetess who lived in the late 15th century. After being born to a young mother who raised her in a cave until the age of 2, Ursula was adopted by a local family as her mother went to live out her days in a convent. In her childhood, Ursula studied herbs and plants, eventually crafting potions and remedies for people as her town's herbalist. Townspeople speculated that she bewitched her husband to marry her, and after he passed away just 2 years after they were wed, the townspeople believed she was responsible for his death. These rumors caused Mother Shipton to retire into the woods, living in the cave she had been born in. She continued to create herbal remedies for people, and as her popularity grew, she revealed she could see the future. Some of her notable prophecies foretold the fates of several rulers within and after her lifetime, as well as the invention of iron ships, the Great Fire of London in 1666, and the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Her cave is considered to be one of the oldest tourist attractions in England, and the mineral content in the water is so high that it turns objects to stone. The Witte Wieven, translating to the white or wise women, is a Dutch tale surrounding a spirit which presents itself often as a group of 3 witch-like figures draped in dirty white garments. Hundreds of stories have been told about the spirits, however many account that these spirits were the fragments of old Germanic priestesses and wise women appearing as mists surrounding their gravesites. The people who witnessed these spirits believed in their powers and left them food in exchange for their blessings and wealth. Other stories tell of the spirits roaming from door to door asking for food. If you were to refuse them, the spirits would then take revenge. Some stories tell of the vengeful spirit burning down sheds which held cattle, while others tell of the revenge they would take on rude young boys, women they kidnapped, and women who knew how to escape them. There are even stories that tell of farmers who owe their riches to the blessings bestowed upon them by the spirits. If farmers were to break with the tradition of food offerings, they were said to lose their crops as revenge. In Irish mythology, Baive Caha is a goddess of war who takes on the form of a crow. She is associated with war and death, often appearing in tales to foreshadow bloodshed or to participate in the battle herself. She is known to cause fear and confusion among soldiers, moving the tide of battle to her favored side. Other stories tell of Baive appearing prior to a battle to foreshadow the carnage to come or predicting the death of a notable person. She often does this through wailing cries similar to the banshee. In West Virginia, a humanoid creature was reportedly seen stalking the Point Pleasant area between 1966 through 1967. 2 young couples told police that while they were driving in their car, they were followed by a flying man with 10-foot wings and intense, glowing red eyes. And eyelashes that were about a mile long. Just kidding. According to witnesses, the creature was able to fly at incredible speeds as fast as 100 miles per hour. News spread quickly about the creature after more sightings, and it was given the name the Mothman due to how similarly people felt he resembled Batman. The small town of Point Pleasant embraced its famous resident, creating a Mothman festival in 2002 and installing a 12-foot statue dedicated to the creature. There are a number of explanations for the Mothman sightings, but he remains to be one of the most beloved cryptids to this day. For thousands of years, cultures throughout the world have created figures to represent death, and the Grim Reaper is one of the many personified versions. This figure was used heavily in the medieval period when the world was dealing with the Black Death, one of the worst pandemics in history. The Grim Reaper was used to symbolize the ending of one's life as well as fear of the unknown. They are commonly depicted as a hooded skeletal figure holding a scythe, which is used for harvesting the lives of those out of time. While the skeleton is a clear nod to what happens to one's body after they pass, the black mournful robe is very similar to the robes of priests or monks who officiated at one's funeral in the mid-14th century. In comparison to how farmers use their scythe to reap crops for harvest, it is thought that the Reaper used its scythe to reap souls from Earth when their time was up. Today, the Grim Reaper is the most recognized personification of death of all time. Samhain is a pagan festival originating from an ancient Celtic spiritual tradition. It is observed from October 31st through November 1st to welcome the harvest and mark the beginning of the dark half of the year. It is believed that the barriers between the physical world and the spirit world break down during Samhain, allowing interaction between humans and spirits. Traditionally, after harvest work is complete, celebrants join with priests to light a community fire. Because the barrier between worlds is so thin, participants prepare offerings which are left outside for spirits that may come by. Celebrants also dress as animals and monsters so that fairies would not kidnap them. Throughout the Middle Ages, carved turnips called jack-o'-lanterns began to appear, which were later switched for pumpkins. Eventually, October 31st became known as All Hallows Eve or Halloween and contained many of these traditional pagan practices. This drawing is actually a nod back to an illustration I did back in 2018, which I'll include at the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching my 2021 Inktober video compilation. I hope you enjoyed it. I always make a zine at the end of the entire series that includes each illustration and story to go along with it. So if you would like, you can grab one of these in my Etsy shop. I'll leave the link in the description.